let's start early. Let's sort of go chronologically, for lack of a better plan here, because your dad was a chief in Nigeria, which you don't hear very often from somebody who's a Navy SEAL in the United States. They're like, wait a second, you're from Africa? I didn't even know. I guess you can't run for president, but you could be a Navy SEAL. So you got that going for you.
Yeah. Well, actually, I can't run for president because my mom is American. And so I was born an American citizen abroad. Well, my dad, he was a visionary. He always looked like 10, 20, 30 years into the future. And so he always wanted the potential to exist for my brother and I to be able to run in politics. So he ensured that when I was born, I wasn't born with dual citizenship. I was just born a U.S. American. I was a U.S. citizen abroad. But, yeah.
Interesting. So he didn't want anybody to be like, oh, you're actually not as American as you're just he didn't want any question. He wanted you to only be USA.
And due to the corruption in Nigeria, which still persists, he didn't want me to, be relegated. I mean, there was no real benefit from his perspective. There was no real benefit for me to have Nigerian citizenship.
Yeah,
because
interesting.
of all of the corruption out there. But my dad, he was his father was a royal chief in the Yoruba tribe. Yoruba is one of the most prominent tribes in Nigeria. You have Igbo, Hausa, but Yoruba essentially stands at the top. And he had like 8, 9 wives, kept on having girls with his wives. And then finally my grandmother came along and she was able to produce an heir, which was my father. So my father naturally naturally acquired the title of chief, being the firstborn son. And then obviously the last name Adeleke, which Ade means crown and Leke means supreme. So the crown is supreme or above. And so when I came along, I wasn't the firstborn son, but I did and still do have that Nigerian royal Yoruba lineage, so to speak. That was
wow. That's really interesting. I had no idea. I mean, we've heard of the corruption in Nigeria and stuff like that, but and it still persists as you mentioned. So wait, does this mean you have 9 grandmas? Or does it not work like that?
I have one grandma, my one grandma, but I don't even, that's a really good question. I never thought about it. I don't know if I would consider my step grandmothers or what, but they were about 8 other women along with my grandmother that were my grandfather's wives.
And then you have all these like well, I guess not step, but aunts. Like, step aunt? Is that even a thing? I don't even know how that works.
Yeah, I think that's what it would be called, step aunt. And then a lot of cousins, a lot of, I would probably be cousins, correct?
Yeah, I guess.
It would be cousins.
It is, but I don't know if it's like, because it's usually we don't have to deal with 9 wives over here, so I'm not sure the technical aspect of that, but I guess, cousin, step cousin. That's very interesting. That's a humongous family. I mean, that gets enormous really fast. You probably don't even know all those people.
No, not at all. Not at all. I mean, there's a very famous Nigerian singer named Davido. And so we're distant relatives because of that. His father is a younger half brother to my father. So from one of the wives. So there's a lot of distance between.
Yeah. So wait a minute. So then, who's the most famous person in your family? It's not. Is it really not you? Even though you've been in Transformers and everything like that, it's some guy named DeVito.
Yeah, it's DeVito.
Man,
he's like the biggest Afrobeats performer on the planet, actually.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, DeVito.
Well, that's such an interesting family history, and I want to hear a little bit about how your dad. He got screwed over in Nigeria. There's not like another polite way to put it or anything. It was really just exactly what you'd expect from a super corrupt government. But it really. Yeah, it's depressing to read about, right? Because it's so brutal.
Yeah. And so, interestingly, I will say I did a social media post on July 4th, hey, here's a bit of my story, and this is why I'm grateful to be in America because of what happened to my dad. I didn't post it for any other reason, but just to kind of, say happy 4th. And it's gone viral. It's at like almost 4 million views on Twitter. And I've been contacted from news outlets in Nigeria because they're like, some of us have heard the story, but we didn't know that you were that guy's son.
Interesting.
We never put 2 and 2 together. But my dad, he in the well, one, he was educated in the West. He went to school in London, got his bachelor's and master's in architecture and engineering, and then he began to accumulate his wealth and success for the most part in the West. He was one of the first black men on the board of the World Trade Center in New York City. He was the first black man on the board of the British Financial Planning Council in Great Britain, and he started a number of businesses from engineering firms to even partly owned a law firm. I mean, he dabbled in absolutely everything. And after a number of years, he decided, hey, I want to take everything that I've learned and all of this wealth that I accumulated and bring it back to Nigeria and establish some businesses in Nigeria, because many people don't know this, but Nigeria is very, very rich in resources, from oil to natural gas to gold to cocoa to other minerals. I mean, you name it, Nigeria has it. As a matter of fact, now, China is signing pacts with a lot of different African countries, Nigeria included, in order to be able to mine a lot of the materials that are in the specific regions, because Africa and Nigeria especially are very, very rich in resources. So my dad went back to Nigeria. He wanted to establish somewhat of a Black Wall Street / a World Trade Center area in Nigeria, in Lagos specifically, that people not just from around Africa, but people from around the world could come to and do business. Because again, he understood that if we could somehow organize the selling and the trading of our resources in a more structured format, in a more structured place, then we'll be more successful, and we'll be able to kind of get rid of some of this corruption that takes place in Nigeria. And so he went back to Nigeria and he bought a massive plot of land in Lagos called Mariko. And he started to, his development. And long story short, there was a military coup, so the land he spent £8 million for it. It was essentially taken from him. Just for inflation, that's a lot of money.
Yeah, man, jeez.
In the 70s, and so military coup essentially threw out that idea for a bit, but then after democracy was reinstalled, he went to court and was fighting the Nigerian government for compensation or for the Mariko back. Long story short, the federal government, they saw that his case was legit and that the land was unjustly taken from him. And so they gave him an offer. They said, hey, what do you want? Do you want your money back? We're not going to give you Mariko back. That's not going to happen. We're not going to give you Mariko, but we'll give you your money back.
Because they built on it, right? So they were like, well, wait, now we got to compensate everybody and untie the knot.
Exactly. And they had already started to do deals with other people, not just from inside Nigeria, but people from outside of Nigeria as well, other countries. And so there was a lagoon, and still is, but a lagoon off the coast of Lagos, and Ikoyi to be specific. And my dad said, I want the lagoon. Now, at the time, it was more of a swamp, but now it's a beautiful lagoon. And the judges and the people in power said, what are you going to do with a lagoon? And
give him the swamp. This dumbass wants a swamp. Give it to him, right? Yeah,
exactly. They laughed, and he said, just give it to me. Again, he was so forward thinking, because in his mind, he figured, if I create something where there was never something, where there was never anything, no one could ever come back. No politician, no government entity, no one could ever come back and say that belongs to us. We require that now. And so he started. He signed a deal, signed a contract. Everything started moving forward, and then finally he hired some Dutch engineers, the Westminster Company, and they came and they started dredging the foreshore and developing what was part of a body of water into land. And around this time is when I was born. I was born in 82 and my brother was born in 81. So when we were born in the midst of this and in the midst of the wealth and the construction and, my dad having people from all around the world. As a matter of fact, the architect of the World Trade Center in New York City, who my dad was really, really good friends with, he would come to Nigeria to visit my dad because he designed the Twin Towers, the World Trade Center Twin Towers that were going to be at the center of what was to be called Lagoon City, and so this is what I was born into. I was born into wealth and prestige and all also having a royal title, and people from around the world respected my dad and coming to Nigeria to see what he did. And so we had cars, we had nannies, we had drivers. I mean, we had it all. We even traveled the world, Paris. I have pictures behind me on the table, not this table behind me, but on the desk below on the table below the table behind me. And there's pictures of us all around the world doing all kinds of good things, and
wow.
Eating and dining with dignitaries and very influential people. As a matter of fact, I remember years later after my dad died, I found a letter from Ronald Reagan that he had written to my father. And I was just like, oh my God. But unfortunately, in 1987, the corruption got was already out of control, but got more so out of control and the politicians who essentially, and not the politicians, but the government entities that essentially awarded my dad the lagoon after the land had formed, not after he signed a contract, not when he started dredging the foreshore, not when the land had been formed and then they waited until after it was formed and he started to do construction on the island to say the Lagos state government came in and said the federal government was never supposed to award you this lagoon.
Mm-hmm. Of course.
Because of how close it is to Lagos, it is property of Lagos. And
it's exasperating. I mean, to say the least, right? Understatement.
Absolutely. And there were a lot of people close to my dad, and people who weren't close to my dad that played a role in doing this. As a matter of fact, my dad, our family bodyguard, my dad's personal security guard, is now to this day the manager of what is now called Banana Island. So the name was changed from Lagoon City to Banana Island, and now that island is a place where the wealthiest Africans and even Nigerians have properties and have estates, from mansions to compounds, you name it, it's on that island. And it was never intended for that. My dad never intended for it to be a Beverly Hills. He intended for it to be a place where Nigeria could be a shining beacon towards the world as it relates to business. So
fuck. I mean, it sucks to hear. I read that and I was just like, this is why this country is in the place that it is, because someone's like, this guy wants this to be international, get us a bunch of respect, and somebody else is like, yeah, but I kind of want more money for myself. So when I balance those two concerns out, I really fall on the side of me stealing this from you. Sorry, man.
Exactly.
It sucks.
Yeah.
It sucks. It's hard to feel sorry. I'm gonna cancel for this. It's hard to feel sorry for. I feel sorry for the people that live with that corruption because they can't do anything about it. But it's really. It's hard to. I should just cut that because I do feel sorry for it. But it's so frustrating because it's like you can't help a place like that because everybody with any shred of power is just not interested.
No, not at all.
Sharing the wealth, to say the least.
Not at all. It's greed. It's absolute greed. And you know what? You won't get canceled for it, to be honest with you, because I have thousands of messages over the last few days from Nigerians who have found out the story and read the story, and they're just like, all of these politicians lied to us. They said it was theirs. They said that they came up with the idea. They said this and that. And this just proves how evil these people are. And this just proves that they're not for the people. They are for themselves. So I say that to say I don't think you'll get canceled because I got people from Nigeria who are literally saying, "Hey, this is not good, and we are fighting, and we're going to stand for you and with you in this. And can you help me get to America? Because I want to get out of here."
Yeah. P.S. I really need a green card. Yeah. No, I feel bad joking about that because if you live among that corruption, you're not just trying to see Bubba Gum shrimp in Times Square. You want to, anybody who has a shred of upward mobility is just trying to escape. It's like, it's a sad situation. Imagine growing up somewhere where you have no opportunity. I guess you don't have to imagine that because after your family lost everything in Nigeria, you moved to the Bronx. But before that, I still want to paint this picture of Nigeria because you have this little anecdote that I think is kind of interesting in the book that most people probably ignore this, but this guy comes and tries to squeeze through your fence, and he's from the electric company. Tell me about this, because this is like a perfect little miniature portrait of everyday life in Nigeria, probably.
Yeah, there's a saying in Nigeria: "Every day is for the thief," and so
Yeah, that's
so
horrible.
that story encapsulates that point very, very finely. But yeah, my mom and I and brother, we were outside in the garden, just hanging out, playing around, and mom was listening to music, and this guy squeezes through our compound gate, and he approaches my mom and says, "Madame, if you want your electricity to be not to be interrupted, you got to give me a gift. You got to give me some money." And my mom being a New Yorker, very like street New Yorker,
I got a gift for you, pal.
Yeah, she lays into him, and good thing was my dad ended up approaching around that, in the midst of that situation and tearing into him. But that's how it is. Every single person in Nigeria, because of the corruption at the top, they feel that that's the only way they can make money, even at the bottom. Case in point, when I landed in Nigeria, I went to Nigeria to finish writing my book, Transformed. And as soon as I landed in Nigeria, and before I even got to customs, there were customs agents who were telling me, "Do you have a gift for me? In order for you to get through,
so
you have
ridiculous.
to give me a gift." And I was like, "Excuse me?" And it was disheartening because here corruption is what was my dad's demise. It wasn't the corruption that he wasn't doing anything corrupt, but it was the corruption that was projected upon him from the country. And as soon as I land, after over 30 years, I'm met with that same corruption. Even got pulled over by the police at one point and held up at gunpoint and said, "Unless you give us X amount of dollars, we're not going to let you go by." So that every day is for the thief, as and that's insane. It comes out of Nigeria. So that was that day, that situation where the guy squeezed through the gate and was essentially trying to bribe my mom and tell my mom
Extort your
my
mom.
Tell, if you don't give me any money, I'm going to cut off your electricity.
It's crazy. Yeah. It's crazy. The different, and people will say, "Well, we have that kind of stuff here in the West." Okay, we do have problems like that here, but I think most people start off in politics or whatever job with good intention, and some become grifters later, although that might be changing by now. But in Nigeria, it sounds like, from your book, it sounds like people go into politics to become grifters because they're like, "Sweet, I can rob a large number of people if I get this job."
That's exactly what it is. I mean, here in the U.S., when somebody is in an impoverished situation, at least coming from growing up in the Bronx, what are the jobs that they look to? Selling drugs, sports, or rap, for the most part, right? And that's their way out. In Nigeria, where you have the vast majority of people are poor, not because it's a poor country, it's a very rich country in resources. It generates a lot of money, but because of the politician, when you have the vast number of people who are poor and they see these politicians who go into politics not wealthy at all, without a cent to their name, but they come out billionaires, not millionaires, but they come out billionaires with a B. What do you think these people want to do? So a lot of people most people who go into politics in Nigeria, they go into politics to get rich. They don't go into politics to serve the people. And that's just a cycle that has been created for decades. So that's what they're used to. There is because they can't go into other jobs and rise up. Like here in the West, you can start out at the bottom, bust your ass, as a podcaster, bust your ass as a janitor, whatever the case may be, and end up with a retirement and end up having a good life. You can't do that in Nigeria, but you could do that in politics. And so that's the trend, and it's sad.
It's so like the only shred of upward mobility is a corrupt career path, a career path of graft, basically.
Yeah. And then once people get into it and, they get the taste of it. For example, in there was a story, I can't remember what article it was published in, but the oil minister, the minister of oil, which was a woman, she sold barrels of oil to, I can't remember what country it was. I can't remember if it was China or some European country, for pennies, literally pennies on the dollar. But she pocketed all that money. So she essentially cut a deal with them. Essentially, again, I'm kind of paraphrasing and truncating because I don't remember the exact numbers, but essentially saying, "I'll give you this ship of oil for $5 billion," when in reality it's worth, $20 billion. You just give me $5 billion under the table, and the ship will kind of disappear and end up where it needs to be on your end.
Crazy.
And so she's been seeking. She fled to the UK. I can't remember. I know the Nigerian government has been trying to get her back, but she fled to the UK and said, "Oh, she has cancer and she needs to get treatment there. And then after her treatment, she'll come back." But from what I remember, she never went back to Nigeria.
I hope somebody like that actually is sick because they frickin' deserve it. If you live a life of crime like that, like I hope you are rotting in a hospital in the UK. I don't believe it, but I hope like karma. So your dad passes away from what sounds like rabies, but you leave it a little vague, and I wonder if you think that is that what happened, or you're not sure.
It's all fresh in my mind because the book got picked up to be a film with a major studio. It hasn't been announced yet because we can't announce the studio just yet. But this is all. I've just finished writing all of this. I turned the screenplay into the studio, but essentially, I go into a little bit more detail in the actual in the film. But I can kind of give you a bit of a spoiler here.
Sure.
My dad, he was super stressed out about everything that had been happening. And when he was stressed out, he, would go for long walks. And he ended up going for a walk, as he did days before. And the neighbor's dog, it actually wasn't a Nigerian guy. The guy was Indian. A lot of people don't know this, but Nigeria has a big Indian population as well. His dog attacked him, and my dad, and I want to be careful about saying he contracted rabies, but it was he got bit by a dog. So he went to the doctor to go get treated in the case the dog had rabies. And he was poisoned, essentially. So the medication that he was given in order to treat him on an autopsy report, the medication was bad medication.
That's terrible.
So that's ultimately what killed him. It caused I forgot his heart died, and essentially that's what killed him. So
corruption, man, because the bad medication was because somebody put something in there that wasn't supposed to be in there, or just put no active ingredient in there, or whatever,
or poison him. Poison him, and they pretty much he was poisoned. The short end.
Do you think it was deliberate that they did that?
100%. Because
I see.
Because my dad, he was a very powerful man in Nigeria, and they with Mariko. After that was taken from him, he fought them for years, and eventually they had to relent and give him the swamp. And they knew that my father would not stop fighting them. And they knew that island would be worth billions of dollars. My dad had already, put the 8 million pounds aside. My dad had already invested. He signed contracts with Marks and Spence, McDonald's, other companies to already start come work on to be housed on the island. He had signed deals with construction. He invested millions and millions of more dollars. Even dredging the foreshore and creating the island cost millions more. And so he wasn't going to let that go. He was a very vociferous man, and he wasn't going to let that go. And the Nigerian government knew him. As a matter of fact, one of the top generals in Nigeria who's still alive to this day, who benefited from my dad, who my dad did favors for, that guy, we believe, played a role in my father's
It's so disgusting.
Yeah, and
I'm sorry I'm even making you talk about this because it's so disgusting. It's so gross.
I don't mind talking about it because the truth needs to get out there. And I think that in what's happening on social media now with, so many Nigerians are reaching out to me and saying, hey, this politician, or the current president of Nigeria was the senator of Lagos during this whole situation.
Yeah.
And all of these Nigerians are reaching out to me and saying, the president said that he was the one that discovered the island, and now I'm seeing he's lied about so much, but now we're seeing how it's a lie because you've shown all of the receipts and you've shown all of the evidence that it was your family's, and so they killed my dad. They had to, because they knew that my dad being a chief and my dad being connected, and my dad was not going to give that up.
Yeah, he sounds like a very driven / very stubborn kind of guy. Like you're not getting one over on Chief from the sound of it.
Exactly. Dang. And so he died 3 weeks later. After it was taken, and after he started fighting them in court and busting their ass and showing receipts and doing all the things, they said, okay, this guy's he's not going anywhere.
Do you feel safe going back to Nigeria? Would you go back now? Because it sounds like you got a lot of attention that maybe wouldn't do you any favors if you go back now.
Yeah, I'd go back now.
Yeah?
I wouldn't mind going back now. If it benefits, I have a half brother who's out there now. He's a lawyer. He's actually the lawyer on the case. He's been on the case since 1987.
Oh my
In fact,
God.
the Lagos state government offered him $8 million 4 years ago in compensation.
Oh, because is it starting to creep up? Like he's just making enough noise that they're starting
Oh
to.
yeah, well, I mean, a few things have happened. One, they offered him 8 million. He turned it down because he said, "Listen, this is my dad. He bought Miracle for 8 million pounds, and this was in his 70s, and his compensation was the swamp, and then all the other money he invested in, and just adjust for inflation, the value of it now it's worth billions of dollars. So he turned down the 8 million.
Yeah, inflation and interest, by the way.
Interest, and interest. So he turned all of that down, and a few months later was maybe a year later was the End SARS movement. I don't know if you remember the End SARS movement that happened.
End SARS?
Yeah, END and then SARS. It was almost like the BLM
like ending
riots.
the disease of SARS, or is this something else?
It was a police force.
Oh, okay, because you know what SARS is, right? Like it's a respiratory disease. All right, so confused.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. So it was a police force, and so there were big riots and protests, and conveniently, some protesters went into the courthouse where the case has been for 30 plus years, and they found all of the documents, all of the evidence, everything that as it pertains to Banana Island and Lagoon City, my dad's case, and they burnt those files. And it was protesters. Nothing else burned down in the courthouse, but just those files were burnt by protesters. And so my half brother, who's a lawyer, happened to be in the UK, who was in the UK at the time when all this was going on. He jumped on a plane, flew. I mean, the guy had brain cancer, had a tumor. He has to wear like a helmet on his head now because they had to take a piece of his skull out, and the doctors have to go in every so often and do some work. And, he flew down there and, confronted the judge, and they said, what can we do? It was the protesters. They wanted to fight for. They didn't even take a
pen off the judge's desk, but they burnt your files only.
They burnt the files.
Such
so this is
transparent bullshit.
Yeah.
That's freaking so aggravating. When you're listening to this, for the listeners listening to this right now, how frustrated are you listening to this story? Imagine living this as your reality every single day, and you're trying to get something done. You're trying to open a restaurant or go to college or anything. I know we're going to get Nigerian listeners being like, thank you, because no one talks about this. Because I'm sure that this is just a reality every single day for every single person growing up there. It's 100%. So sad, man.
100%. Yeah, it's kicking the nuts.
So Chief passes away, and you move to the Bronx, which is like a different kind of neighborhood, I would imagine, that you're used to in Africa.
Yeah. Went from riches and wealth to the Bronx, man. And it was, I would say in my early years, my mom, such a strong woman, much credit to my mom. She did a great job of masking the reality of what had happened. We didn't have much, but our little apartment that we did have, she always kept it clean. There was some art that she was able to bring from Nigeria that was peppered around the house. So she did the best that she could to mask the reality of what had happened and also our environment. And she would work multiple jobs. She started out just working as a teacher in the South Bronx, and then she would take jobs at museums and art galleries and even playhouses in order to be able to expose my brother and I to the arts. And then she would educate us on top of sending us to school, public school, because the public education system was really bad. She would homeschool us as well, so that way we could stay on par with the standard, which wasn't the best at the time either, at a minimum. And so it was really, really rough, man. But it wasn't until I was about 8 years old that I began to become conscious of our surroundings. I would go out and see guys handing other people who didn't look too healthy bags of stuff, and I would put two and two together, whereas my mom would tell me, oh, they're just giving each other some treats. It's nothing. I was able to, no, that's drugs. I would see these people looking like zombies, and my mom would tell me, oh, they're just sick. No, that's a crackhead. You know what I mean? I would go into these bodegas and see the mafia guys, because Italian mafia was very prevalent at the time in the late 80s and early 90s, going with their collar, their big collars, and shake down the Dominican store owners. And I was like, that's not right. I think that guy might be a mobster. You know what I mean?
Jeez.
And so as I began to really, as I grew up and began to venture out of my mom's apartment, this bubble that she created, that's when I began to understand the environment that I was in, and understand that I'm not in Kansas anymore, and that rich life that we had is never going to come back. Never going to come back.
How old were you at this point in time?
Yeah, so I came to the States in 87, so I was 5 at the time.
5, okay.
And then it was around 8 when I was 9 years old, when I really began to become conscious of my surroundings.
That makes sense. I guess the change in lifestyle would be something you would notice, but not as much at age 5, right? I suppose. I mean, you remember things, but you don't. Your mother's change would be dramatic.
Yep.
And almost impossible. I don't know how I would deal with that if I had to move now to the Bronx. Yeah. Or whatever the equivalent is. I think the Bronx is probably, you probably got $4,000 studio apartment in the Bronx now. But back then, it would be very, very tough to adjust. And she was also a single mom with two little kids?
2 boys.
Yeah.
2 boys.
So we're talking about like drugs and drive-bys. And then you see the movie, was it Bad Boys with Martin Lawrence and Will Smith, which is a funny movie, but kind of like, that's what inspired you? Like, tell me about the shift in mindset.
Yeah, so the shift in I did a lot of bad things. So after I began to realize my environment, and I began to unconsciously try to find a father to fill my void, and I looked to the streets. So I started out, stealing from my mom, the little that she had, and then that progressed to stealing from stores, that progressed to getting jobs and stealing from jobs, and that progressed to selling drugs, and that progressed to running high-level scams where I was bringing in tens of thousands of dollars a week. And I remember in my teens, when Bad Boys came out, I was selling drugs at the time, just hustling, making money, doing what a lot of other kids did in my environment. And I went and saw Bad Boys. And interestingly, in the movie, the drug dealers were the bad guys, and they weren't black. And the good guys were Black dudes who I felt like I can identify with. These were guys who looked like me. They seemed to have come from somewhat of the same environment that I came from, but they were heroes. They were heroes with swagger. And that was the first time in my life, well, since I had come from Nigeria to the Bronx, that, a light went off in my head. And I was like, oh, I could be something other than a drug dealer or an athlete or a rapper. Like I could be a hero. And I could still be who I am. I could still maintain, my swag and be a hero at the same time. So that movie really enlightened me. And then a year later, the same director, Michael Bay, directed another movie called The Rock. And, of course, having saw Bad Boys and loved that movie. I never forget, after I watched Bad Boys, I went and bought a bootleg tape version of it, and I just watched it over and over.
Or they're holding the camera in the movie theater.
Yeah, holding the camera in the movie.
Those are terrible. There's people getting up and walking out to get popcorn in front of the movie and everything. Oh, man.
Crying babies sometimes. Yeah, after watching it a million times on cassette, then a year later or 2 years later, The Rock came out, and as soon as I heard, hey, Michael Bay, the same guy who brought you Bad Boys, is doing The Rock, I was like, all right, I'm gonna go see this movie, and I went to go see it, and that was the first time I was exposed to Navy SEALs. And growing up in the Bronx, in the hood, like, no one knows what a Navy SEAL is, or special operations, or any of this stuff. We're not exposed to it. We're exposed to the things that I've already touched on, but we're not exposed to, things like engineering or being a doctor, because there's not a lot of engineers, doctors, Navy SEALs that live in the Bronx, And so, when I watched the film, and I saw these guys coming out of the water, and they had these cool guns, and they were willing to sacrifice themselves for others and for a greater cause, and they were cool. And I was just like, whatever that is, if I ever turn my life around, I'm not saying I will, but if I ever turn my life around, that's what I'm gonna do. I'm going to be a Navy SEAL. And I filed that away and continued doing what I was doing, continued selling drugs. And then as I mentioned, after when I was about 18, after this was definitely after high school, I began to realize that, this is a huge risk. I stopped selling drugs down in the Bronx and I migrated up to Poughkeepsie, New York, because there were less drug dealers up there. And then I was able to get in with a company called MCI WorldCom. And when I got there, I met a guy.
The phone company?
Yeah, the phone company.
Yeah.
And I call it a different name in the book, but
yeah, that's probably a good idea.
yeah, maybe we should say. So I got a job with WCT.
Yeah, there you go.
And a guy there was a hustler, former drug dealer as well, and he was like, "Hey, dude, here's how you could hustle and make money." And so what he would do was he would get people's personal information, date of birth, social address, full name, and he would activate. He could activate 3 phones on 1 line of credit. And then he would sell those phones to drug dealers for anywhere between $300 and $900. And the phone, for the first 30 days, there was no bill. After 30 days, the person whose credit was used received the bill. And then that person had 60 days to pay the bill. And then if it wasn't paid in 60 days, then 30 days later, which was 90 days later, was 90 days in total, the phone would cut off. So drug dealers like the phones because they could have a free unlimited plan phone for 90 days, and then it would cut off and they would get a new one. So it would be hard for cops and people to trace them and track them down. And so that guy put me onto it, and I was like, hey, I'm in. And so I started doing that. A guy I went to high school with, his girlfriend worked as a MA at a hospice clinic, and so she would give me and him, give him the information, sheets of information of people who were about to die, and I would take that and I would activate phones. Again, this is not something I'm proud of.
No.
This is the bad Nigerian side of me.
Right.
But this is the good side of me in the sense that, I took my dad's ingenuity and I applied it but I applied it the wrong way. And that's how I ended up making a lot of money, more money than I ever made selling drugs. With that money, I essentially would launder that money. I'm reaching, because this CD right here, I'll drop it right here. I launder that money into a record company called Eighth Wonder Entertainment. So, I signed artists and paid for studio time and did all of these different things as it relates to running a record company. And I was able to do it and grow the company because of this illegal money. And my goal was to get out. I had an exit plan, similar to how Jay-Z and Dame Dash were selling drugs, and their plan was to make it in the music business and not sell drugs anymore. My plan was to do the cell phone thing, accumulate all of this money to build the business, and then at some point sign a label deal with Def Jam or MCA or one of the major record companies. And so, yeah, that's essentially what I was doing.
So I'm guessing the rap career took a little bit of a right turn because you ended up in the Navy. Your mom had it hard with you, man. You're like a punk kid, sell drugs, and then it's like, just kidding, I'm going to be a rapper. And then it's like, nah, I'm going to go join the military during a time where the country is maybe going to go to war. Yikes.
Yeah, so what happened was I got involved in a deal with a drug dealer, sold him a bunch of phones that were supposed to last for like the 90-day period. They cut off in 2 weeks. He, in return, had flipped those phones. So if I sold him a phone for $500, he sold it for $1,000. So he was in hot water with a bunch of guys. And so he essentially came to my apartment and threatened my life. And that was a huge wake-up call for me. I gave him his money back. And then that's when I decided I'm not going to do this anymore. And then fast forward 6 months later, well, before that, I got a meeting with Def Jam, tried to sell a label deal to Def Jam, Kevin Lau specifically. I'll never forget meeting with him, and had some other meetings, and none of them panned out. Didn't end up getting a label deal. All the money ran out that I had saved, and so I was dry. Fast forward to June of 2002. That's when I really that's when the change came. I kind of was, in my mom's apartment doing nothing with my life, and I just felt something tell me, you need to get out of here. You need to join the military. And I battled with that idea for a few minutes because I hated the military. I hated the police. I associated anybody in a uniform as the police. I didn't like authority. I like my clothes baggy, my hats backwards. I still wear my hats backwards.
Still wear the hat backwards, yeah.
Yeah. And so I didn't want to do it. But after looking around the room that I had grew up in, I finally realized, hey, what else do I have? I have nothing. My brother was at Syracuse University studying engineering at the time. I wasn't going to college, and that's when I decided to go join the Navy. And this was 9 months after 9/11, actually. And so I get to the Navy recruiter's office and met this amazing Navy recruiter by the name of Tiana Nadine Reyes. And in my mind, when I went and saw her, I'm like, oh, I'm gonna get me a new girl because she's fine. She's Puerto Rican. And in her mind, she was like, I'm gonna get this fool into the Navy.
Yeah.
And so she had me take a practice ASVAB test. I passed it.
That's like the SAT for the Navy or for the military, right?
Yep. So it pretty much tests your aptitude in different areas. And I scored high enough to get into the Navy, but I didn't score high enough to get into SEAL training. And so the next thing she did after that was she ran my background, and she discovered I had 2 warrants out for my arrest. I had a warrant in New Jersey and I had a warrant in New York. And, as soon as she said that, I got up and ran towards the door, and she screamed at me and told me to stop. And I said, for what? And she said, asked me if I had a suit. I said, no. She asked me if I had a collar shirt and some nice pants. I said, I'm sure I could find something. And she said, come back tomorrow. I said, for what? So you could turn me in? And she just snapped at me and said, just come back tomorrow. And, growing up in the Bronx, I had to learn how to read people. And that served me well when I got into human intelligence and the SEAL teams. And I didn't know exactly what she was going to do for me, but based off what I read and her reaction and the way she had been with me the last hour or so, I realized that whatever it was going to be good. And so I came back the next day, and she was in her dress uniform, and she took me to both judges. Took me to the judge in New Jersey, judge in New York, advocated on my behalf, said, hey, this kid's made mistakes, but he has potential. He wants to join the military after an act of war, but he can't with warrants and a criminal record. And so both judges, they were impressed with the idea that I was raising my hand in the middle of a war. And they said, all right, we'll expunge his record. So both judges unanimously expunged my record. I just had to pay court fines and court fees. And then she went a step further and fudged the paperwork to sneak me into the Navy. And that was how it all happened. And, unfortunately, she died 2 years later. But I'm so grateful to her decision, because if it wasn't for her, I would be dead or in prison. I would be dead or in prison. And
wow, she risked her whole career though, because she was obviously not supposed to do that.
Not at all. In fact, I get contacted by kids from all across the country, at least on a monthly basis, who say, hey, Remi, I read your book, heard your story, and I can't get into the Navy. I had this little misdemeanor. I made this mistake, or whatever the case. And no military recruiter won't touch me. And I tell them about your story, and they say, I'm not going to jail for you.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
So yeah, it's and they ask me what to do, and I say, hey, you just got to find a recruiter who's willing to take that risk. And she did.
It's really, that seems like a large oversight. Now I get why they don't want actual criminals to join the military, but I also think it's a huge mistake to write off a kid who has done something that is not really bad. Like if you get busted for selling weed in high school, that torpedoes your chance in the military. That really, in my opinion, should not be the case. I get it if you have 3 violent assaults or a sexual assault or something like that. I understand that. But even then, juvenile stuff, I don't know, man. It just seems like you're taking a lot of people's last chance to really get their shit together and being like, nah, we're not going to do that. And I'm really on the fence there. I'm sure there's a reason for the policy, but it seems like a lot of human potential is being wasted.
I agree with you 100%. I want to, at some point, when I get a little bit more juice behind my name, I'd like to be able to go to Congress and advocate for some type of change, because there are so many kids like myself. I mean, I'm proof of concept. I'm proof that it works. There's a lot of kids who just need that second chance. And if they could get that second chance, their whole lives will be turned around. And in fact, right now, there is a recruiting crisis across every branch of service. It's a national security issue. And I talked to a buddy of mine who's he's a master chief at one of the recruiting commands. And he's like, dude, it's bad. I mean, the Army is down 25%, Navy is down across the board. If we went to war right now, we would get crushed. And there are generals and admirals who are shaking in their boots. And so this is a prime opportunity to look at cases, look at kids who, they made them, like you said, nothing violent, nothing crazy, not rape, nothing, but something that, simple cases, and say, hey, we're going to give you a waiver. We're going to give you an opportunity. And I'd like to advocate for that in some way, because something has to change on both ends. Kids need to be able to get an opportunity who made mistakes, and the military needs bodies. We're going to be crushed as a nation. So
it's a pretty good match, right? And you see a lot of people. I know a lot of people who are really just kind of pieces of shit and join the military and are really upstanding guys and gals now, for that matter. And I'm thinking, like, whatever they do there, whoever's doing all that yelling is really, it's getting through to a lot of people, for sure.
100%. 100%. And I know for me, when I was in, I realized that I was the case study, and I knew that if I fouled up in any way, if I was disrespectful to a DI, or if I screamed at somebody, or if I fought somebody, did something stupid, then I would be messing it up for everybody. I would not only be screwing Tiana, but I would be screwing so many other kids, and then, who later in life who want to join the military and they've made the same mistake. So a big part of why I chose and I strove so hard to do the right thing every single day and strive to get to that, special operations, is because I wanted to prove the system wrong. I wanted to prove to the system that, hey, there are people who need a second chance and deserve a second chance, and who will take advantage of it in a good way.
Yeah, I love that. Tiana, the recruiter, who you couldn't let her down. I think that's amazing. And your Aunt Oki, who walked to the bank and didn't want to walk alone because she didn't want to carry all that money on her. You are blessed, man. You have a lot of good people around you.
100%. And again, speaking of Aunt Oki, she died 4 months ago.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
104. She would have been 105.
Lived a full life. Needless to say.
Amazing life. Yeah.
Wow. That's good genetics.
Yeah.
104.
Yeah.
And that's really good genetics. Wow.
Yeah.
Hey, if you like what you're hearing and seeing, check out the Jordan Harbinger Show podcast feed. There's a lot more just like this. You can find the Jordan Harbinger Show in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Now, back to the show.
Tell me about BUDS, the Navy SEAL training, for people who don't know, because my impression of Navy SEALs is usually like white people from upper middle class backgrounds. Not that nobody else can do it, but it just seems like that's what you get with those.
You're spot on. And it is what you get. I mean, you get a lot of guys who come from, interestingly, this is one thing I found. They come from wealthy families. You get a lot of guys who've gone to Ivy League schools. You get a lot of enlisted guys who graduated from Ivy League schools and then decided they wanted to go and enlist instead of going to an officer. I mean, I was in a class with a Rhodes Scholar, right?
That's crazy.
You get guys who were lawyers or engineers, or like computer programmers making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, and then one day they decided, dude, you know what? I think I want to be a Navy SEAL. And so you literally, I was in BUDS with some crazy stories, but you literally get the cream of the crop. And as you mentioned, the majority of them are white. There's not that many African Americans. I think it's the community is less than 1% African American. I was around the 50th, not the 50th, but around the 50th African American SEAL in the history of the SEAL team since 1962. And so when I showed up to BUDS, yeah, man, I couldn't get away with nothing, man.
Yeah.
I couldn't get away with anything because I stuck out like a sore thumb. I was a big black dude and like in the sea of white dudes. And it's literally, and it's tough in and of itself. I mean, it sucks. It's considered the toughest military training known to man. People have died in SEAL training. People have been permanently crippled. I mean, a guy died in my class right in front of me on a conditioning run. And it's brutal.
How did he die? In the book, it sounds like a heart attack or something. Is that what happened?
Yeah, it was a heart attack. We were on a soft sand conditioning run, which was about 8 miles. Those runs are horrible. And towards the end of the mile, when you get to about the 7 mile mark, the instructors warn you. They say if you're not up with the pack, you're going to be in a goon squad. And goon squad is essentially a section of the class that just gets hammered on the beach. I mean, up and down the berm, push-ups to the surf and back. I mean, we call it a beat down session, but it's they literally throw everything at you. And so we were in the goon squad, but we didn't make the cut. And the instructors were just putting us to the ring. There were guys quitting left and right. And this particular guy, Rob Vetter, actually yesterday was his birthday. His heart gave out. His heart gave out and he dropped right in front of me. Me being a corpsman, which is a medic in the Navy before, I was a corpsman before I went to Buds. I saw what was happening. I started CPR with some other guys until the lead Buds instructor came up, and they were, I want to say they worked on him for a while, and then finally they were able to get a pulse, got him to the hospital on Coronado Island. But at that point, I mean, he had been out for such a long time that he was on ventilator, and he was a vegetable for the most part. And then a few days later, his family decided, there's no brain activity, so they decided to pull the plug.
How does that affect your mind when you're doing the same thing as that guy and he just died from it right in front of you, basically?
I want to say that it didn't affect me in any way because I would say once you make the decision to join the Navy, especially when you're pursuing a combat role in the military, whether it's Navy, Army, Marine Corps, you're essentially, in my opinion, you're giving up any fear of death, right? And then once you make the decision, hey, I want to go to Buds, I want to funnel this down and get even more dangerous, you have to cast that fear away, because the reality is in a lot of things you do in training, you can die. I mean, a lot of SEALs die in training. Mm-hmm. Once they get through not just Buds, but once they get to a SEAL team and they're doing IADS or they're doing CQC. And there was a guy, Gane, he was doing CQC training, brand new guy, just graduated from Buds, got to a SEAL team and went to a killer house to do CQC training, and there was a fracture in the wall. So when one team entered one room and they were shooting at a target, a bullet went through that wall right into his heart, killed him. Right?
Oh my gosh!
You get guys who die on skydiving training and all kinds of stuff. So once you make the decision that, hey, I'm going to go into that program, if you have not given up the fear of death, you ain't going to make it. So for me, when that happened, I was just, hey, it's part of the job. You know what I mean? He was close to me, and I talked to him at lunch and breakfast at times because we were in the same boat crew. At the same time, I understood the risk.
That is a mindset that's hard for, I think, a lot of us to wrap our head around. Because for me, I feel like it would either be so demoralizing or so terrifying that I would probably want to quit, which doesn't surprise anybody listening to the show, because me and Navy SEAL do not belong in the same sentence. But that's, there's a reason I'm not a Navy SEAL. You are. But I will say, it's a little weird that you joined SEAL training and you couldn't swim. That's unusual.
Yeah, I think I've been a masochist since an early age, I would say. Yeah, it was that wasn't fun. That was but I wanted it, and I tell people all the time, when you have a dream, it's called a dream for a reason, because you're going to have some obstacles on your journey towards attaining that, and either you could throw your hands up and say I can't do it, or you could do the extra hard work in order to overcome it. And it was brutal. I mean, before I even got to Buds, I remember jumping in the shallow end and trying to figure it out, and it sucked. And there were some times where I was just like, am I going to be able to do this? But I just kept on showing up. Rain, sleet, snow, cold, hot, whatever it was. I ran to that pool and tried to figure it out. And but I wanted it. I wanted to be part of the best. I wanted, and everything that I read, everything that I saw, SEALs were the tip of the spear. They were the best. I know there's other special operations units, but they were the best. And my mom beat into me the importance of whatever you do it right the first time and go for the top. And so, though I was totally disqualified, because there's not a lot of pools in the Bronx and a lot of fire hydrants, but not a lot of pools. That was brutal. That was brutal.
This is the regular training, and then there's Hell Week, which is like they don't even let you sleep. You're talking about weird diseases people get from suppressed immune systems. That's truly, that could kill you too, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Getting 2 hours of sleep and then running, I don't know, 50 miles or whatever in some sand.
Yeah. I mean, it's guys. I almost died in Hell Week. I got pneumonia, sype, and rhabdo, where essentially my muscle tissue started eating itself because my immune system was suppressed. I wasn't getting as many calories, and I was just broken down. But yeah, Hell Week is horrible. I mean, 6 days, starts on Sunday, ends on Friday. You get 2 hours of sleep on Wednesday, 2 hours of sleep on Thursday. But by the time you've gotten to Wednesday and Thursday, your brain is just so wired. Most guys can't even fall asleep in those 2 hours. And then also you're hydrophobic. You become hydrophobic because they keep you wet and cold the entire, every single moment you're wet and cold. So when you put on your dry clothes and you get in that rack, if you're lucky enough to get into the rack, you know, with dry clothes on, you can't go to sleep because you know that you're going to be woken up at any moment to get wet and sandy again and be cold and sandy. So you can't even sleep. So it's very, very brutal, but it's a necessary process because essentially what they're looking for is they're looking for that guy who has been stripped of everything, been stripped of sleep, been stripped of food, is tired, is beaten down, and a zombie, pretty near death, but still willing to keep fighting and keep moving. And it's necessary because, and I remember being in training, not just in Hell Week and in training in general, and hearing instructors saying, "You think this sucks? Wait till I've been on ops that suck worse than this." And I just remember being a bud student saying, "Bullshit.
Yeah, no way.
There's no way you've been on op," until I actually went on an op.
Oh, really?
That was a kick in the freaking nuts. And we're getting shot at, and we had to crawl through a swamp to get to another end. And it's supposed to be a quick direct action mission where we just go in and get the guy and go out, but it turned into a 14-hour chase in the sun at night, and you're beat down, and it's like you can't quit. And when you're in that situation, you're able to fall back on, I went through Hell Week.
Oh,
and if I
interesting.
made it through Hell Week, that I could do that. So it's absolutely necessary. I mean, think about what happened with the guys on Operation Red Wings, you know, and Marcus Luttrell and Lone Survivor, you know, like, you know, they were 4 guys against, you know, a large number of guys with guns, outgunned, outnumbered, right? But those guys kept fighting for each other and didn't quit, didn't give up on each other, and 3 of them died, 1 of them survived. But that one guy, Marcus Luttrell, who survived, wouldn't have survived if those 3 guys didn't go through the same training that he went through, and then they get pushed way past their perceived limits, so they knew what they could do. And so it's a brutal process, but it's a necessary process. And that's why the attrition rate is as high as it is. I mean, the class that I eventually graduated with started out with 270 guys, only 29 of us graduated. And that's the way it is every class. It's, you know, you'll get 10% that'll graduate. You'll get 20%. You'll get, you know, 15 guys. There was a class that just went through Hell Week a few months ago, and the class started with 250 guys. Only 14 guys made it through Hell Week. They haven't even gotten to dive phase and third phase yet. These are guys that just got spit out of Hell Week. You know,
oh my God.
It's a necessary process.
How long are you sore after Hell Week? That's what I want to know.
I mean,
like
I'm
3 weeks.
I'm still sore to this day, and that was over decades ago. But no, it's yeah. So you have a week after Hell Week called Walk Week, where you kind of get a chance to recover and you just walk everywhere instead of run everywhere. And then after that, you're right back in it. But yeah, you're sore for a while.
Man, I would imagine that is just like straight to the bath and then the bed and then I don't know. Oh God.
Yeah. It's brutal,
barely
man.
making it to the mess hall. You got really sick. I know you ended up getting med rolled, and I thought, oh, good, they put you back where you get a chance to rest and you go back, but they make you start over again, which is just cruel, terrible.
Day one, man. Yeah, day one. It was so funny because the instructors, they didn't know that I was sick. They, you know, because you get a lot of guys who want to quit, but they don't want to quit. And so they, you know, they fall on medical reasons and they fake injury or they fake being sick. So when I was sick, I was spitting up blood and I had all this stuff going on. The instructors, you know, they didn't see that I was spitting up blood. You know, they just heard me say, "Hey, I spit up blood." And they thought I was faking. So when I was like passing out, they thought I was, I just didn't want to quit. And which I didn't want to quit, but they thought that I was, I wanted to quit, but didn't want to quit.
What's it called?
And,
Malingering, where you're just faking? Yeah.
Sandbagging.
Sandbagging, yeah.
Yeah. And so they were laying into me. And then finally, after I, went down hard and I ended up in the ICU, they were like, holy crap, like, dude, like you almost died, bro. Like, we're sorry.
Yeah, remember when I told you I was spitting up blood? That was a good indicator.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I remember the instructors came into my room and they were just like, hey, you crushed it. Glad you didn't quit. And I'm expecting them to say, you're not going to have to start from day one of first phase. You're just going to have to start from day one of Hell Week Up. They said, but you're going to have to start from day one. And I was like, oh my God, I got to go through all of this again. But hey, you know what? I wanted it.
Yeah.
I wanted it. And when you want something in life, I tell people all the time, when you, whether you want to be an actor, podcaster, writer, director, doctor, whatever the case is, you got to have a deep-rooted emotional reason as to why you want to do it. Because that deep-rooted emotional reason is going to anchor you when the winds and storms and setbacks of life come. And if you don't have a deep-rooted emotional reason as to why you want to do something, when those waves and the wind comes, it's going to blow you right away. And I had a deep-rooted emotional reason as to why I wanted to be a frogman. And so when, I almost died in Hell Week, and had to start all over, I was anchored in that. When I got kicked out of SEAL training after getting a dive phase and, had to start all over again, like, I was anchored. Like, I was just anchored because I like my dad, I would, and that's why I said early on in the podcast, they had to kill my dad, because my dad wasn't going to stop. And I inherited that aspect of him, along with many other things. I inherited that from my dad, and there was no way I was going to stop. The only thing that could have stopped me was death. And it came from the fact that I was anchored, and so that's what ended up getting me through.
Do you think having your dad pass so early in your life maybe caused a strong desire to be affirmed or approved of by other people? Because that, obviously, that drive comes from somewhere, and it's not like you were not a Division I athlete before SEAL training or whatever.
Yeah, I would say 100%. I think every boy needs a man, a father to affirm him. Because if not, he's going to seek affirmation from others. And every girl needs a father to affirm her, so that, again, same, she doesn't seek out a toxic relationship in a man to affirm her. And in the absence of my father, I didn't, and that's why I sold drugs. That's why I did that. I mean, at the end of the day, when I look at the root of it in retrospect, the reason why I did those things was because I wanted that affirmation from my peers. I wanted what I couldn't get from my father. I wanted that pat. Yo, you the man. Oh, look at all those girls you're sleeping with. Oh, look at all this money. Look at the car, all these things. I wanted that affirmation. And then, I think that also played a huge role in me wanting to get through SEAL training, because part of it, I had my deep-rooted emotional reason why, but I would say my selfish reason was I wanted to be affirmed. I wanted people, whether it was my friends I grew up with, or whether it was my mom or whoever, my brother, to say, you're the man. Good job. Well done, son. Well done, son. And so that did play a role, and it worked for the good. But as I went on, and after I made it through SEAL training, it went south and worked for the bad as well.
There's a lot more to SEAL training and things like that, I'm sure, but or I know because I read the book, but you become a human intelligence specialist. Tell me about that, because that's not a usual, that's a pretty rare specialty, isn't it? Or it's not something most people want?
Yeah, it's something that I never knew about. It's not something that was talked about much, but it is a very, very unique specialization in the community, not just in the SEAL teams, but in special operations in general. And in order to get into the school is pretty hard, but a lot of SEALs don't even want to go to the course because it revolves around a lot of writing. Not only do you have to go out and have meetings with sources or assets, agency guys call them assets. We in our community, we call them sources. In the policing community, they call informants. But not only do you have to go have meetings with these people and learn how to run these people so that they can do stuff that you need to be done and collect intelligence for you. You also have to write very detailed reports, and you have to write reports in a way where a CIA agent, DIA agent, NSA agent, or even another SEAL, a human guy, can pick up that report 10 years later and read it as though those events happened that day. So it revolves around a lot, not just writing, but visual writing. And so once I got into, there's a course that you go to. It's it's the entry level course, and then after that entry level course, then you operate for a bit, and after you operate in that capacity, then you get the opportunity to go to some more advanced courses. And so HUMINT stands for human intelligence, and essentially all it is you're somewhat of a spy, really. I mean, you're running sources, and you're collecting intelligence, and you're building intelligence packages. And when I went overseas, I tell people all the time, I got to live the best of both worlds, because I got to, there's this misconception as it relates to the military and special operations as well, that you just get told to go after that bad guy, or you just get told to go do this mission, and then you run off and just mindlessly do it. And that's not the way it works. You can't go on an operation without intelligence. And it can't just be one piece of intelligence. It has to be vetted against another piece of intelligence, which has to be vetted against another piece of intelligence, which has to be vetted. And then once it's been fully vetted, then you can go on an operation. And so there were times overseas where, we had ISR drone footage of something that a bad guy had done or had planned, but we couldn't just go after that bad guy. I had to then task some sources to go get some more on ground, information, whether it was through taking pictures or whether it was through talking to other people. And then I would then take that information, add it to a package, and then maybe we get what's called, in the civilian sector, we call it a wiretap, but we tap that person's phone, and we have that person confessing, and then we put all of that together into a package, send that up a chain of command, and then we're able to go on a direct action mission. So I handled the intelligence side of things, but then I also suited up, and there were times when I suited up when I had to bring a source with me, because he or she knew what that target looked like, or knew the specific house or the specific door we needed to gain entry through, and so that source had to go with me, and we had to go do the op. I mean, they weren't kicking down the door, but they were in the back of the train, and we went and kicked down the door. And once we got to where we got, if we needed that person to verify, who was who, then they would come in, and obviously we'd keep them masked and keep them protected and verify that. But it's a whole world of intelligence that's very, very vast and fascinating, very cool. And I say that not only did my mom having my brother and I write as kids prepare me for that job, but growing up in the streets of the Bronx prepared me for that job.
I was going to ask about that. If you think your instincts growing up in that area of New York at that time, that's as close as you get to dealing with terrorists, I guess, in the Middle East as you can get in the United States.
100%, because, growing up in the streets of the Bronx, you have to, especially when you're selling drugs, you're selling drugs and selling illegal phones. You gotta be able to read. Is this person an undercover cop? Is this person, gonna snitch? Is like, what's going on? You gotta be. Is this person gonna kill me? So I was able to say. It's so interesting because I remember being in the entry level course, the basic course for the HUMINT program, and I remember being in the classroom, and our instructors were former CIA guys. They were former Green Berets guys who did this type of work for decades, and I remember them that they would teach us stuff. I was like, oh, I know what that is. I just didn't know that was the title for what I did that in the Bronx. You know what I mean? So it's like all of these things translated really, really well. And it prepared me. And I remember, and the cool thing too was a lot, because less than 1% of SEALs are African American, and then when you get into the human side of things, that number dwindles even more, because now not only are you dealing with a SEAL, but you're dealing with a SEAL in human intelligence. It's a fraction of a fraction of a fraction. I would meet with sources, and I'd be the first Black person that they ever saw in their entire life. Or had a conversation with.
My God. They must be like, oh, Will Smith, like the stupid stereotype, like the.
That would happen. But I would utilize that.
Yeah.
I would utilize that because I learned when I remember doing my first deployment, I learned that, a lot of people in not just the Middle East, but other parts of the world, they love American movies and they love African American comedians.
Yeah.
And so I remember going into my first meeting and the guy saw me smiling as I walked in. He was like, Eddie Murphy, Eddie Murphy. And so I just used that. So when I would go into my meeting sometimes in order to kind of break the ice, or if a source was scared or had, didn't want to talk to me that day, whatever, I would go in and I would just like, yo, what's up? And they would look at me, and they would just start laughing. They would look at the interpreter. They'd be like, I like this guy, I like this guy. And that would break the ice. And then we would go to work and do what we needed to do. So it all worked to my benefit. And that's why, again, going back to what we touched on earlier with the recruiting crisis, and also, giving more people opportunities, especially people who come from the background I come from, it benefits the military. It benefits because, diversity is, proper diversity is important, especially when you're trying to go into other countries and build common ground, or have somebody like myself. These guys, I already had a foot in the door when I went to go talk to them, because they were just intrigued by the fact that, oh, this is a black guy, right?
Yeah.
And then I felt like I was able to identify with them, because it's not the Bronx per se, but they are living in a very volatile environment. They're living in an environment where at any moment they can be killed or they can die. And, it's the same thing in the Bronx. So there was that natural, identifying factor that we had, and we could it was almost like a look. There was a certain look in their eye that I could see and be like, we bros, right? And then there's a certain look in mine, they're like, whatever, right?
That's funny. Man, what a unique way to connect. Because I can imagine if some dude was on the Harvard crew team and he's a Navy SEAL and he's inhuman and he's got to talk to this guy, he's not jumping into an Eddie Murphy bit to connect with that guy in an authentic way. I just imagine you being like, Ahmed, what have you done for me lately? You remember that?
Yeah.
With your purple leather suit on.
Yeah.
Man.
And I remember being in I remember when I first got in country on my first deployment. I remember like watching and listening in on a meeting, and because we did like somewhat of a we call it like a turnover op. And I just remember the guy it was like no real connection. It wasn't that he was doing a bad job. Like, he was doing a good job. He was getting the information, but it wasn't as smooth as it could have been, because it's just white guy from Harvard that's
right.
like, hey, so tell me where the bad guys are. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Versus, which is not a bad thing, because the job was still being done. But the background that I had really played a role in making the job a bit easier.
Yeah, that makes a hell of a lot of sense, actually. Those guys, those sources must be scared out of their mind when they have to go with you on a mission.
Oh my God, yes.
Because they're not in your unit, and you're like, follow us. And they're like, okay, but we're going to go into this neighborhood and everyone's going to be shooting at us, and I just have to sit behind you and hope I don't get killed. This sucks.
Yeah, well, before we even would get on the op, so what would happen was I would go into when I would do my meetings, I wasn't wearing uniforms and kit, and I would just have on a collared shirt, slacks, pants, and I'd have a cig on my side, that they couldn't see, was concealed. So I was in normal clothes. So they would see me, and that's how they would. And that's how all my sources knew me, because that was the only capacity they would see me in. And so they would see me like this, and then I was like, all right, talk them into going on the op, and they was like, and they were scared about it, and then they was like, okay. I would finally convince them they would do it, and then I was like, all right, I'll be right back. Just give me about 15 minutes, and I would go to my trailer, because we all had on our trailers with our own own rooms and space, and I'd get on my kit, I'd get on my uniform, I'd get on my ballistic vest with my ammo and grenades and all of that, and I get my M4 with the suppressor, the silencer on it, and all of this stuff. And I had my ski mask and helmet and night vision goggles, and I would go back in. And like, that's when reality was set in. Like, they're like, oh my God, like, who are you? They didn't know who I was. And
I mean, Call of Duty
like,
now.
Hey, it's me. Yeah. They was like, oh, this is real. Things have gotten real. And the fear would set in right away. But, I would kind of, coach them and talk them through it. And when we would get out there, they would pissing themselves.
I bet, man, because you're carrying that body armor. That stuff's heavy. Yeah. Did they get the same armor with the same plate, or you just give them like, okay,
yeah.
But
I want to give them. We want to give them weapons, and,
right? Obviously,
kit and ammo on. But we take care of them, make sure they have one, and also make sure that they're completely concealed from head to toe, so they couldn't be identified in any way.
But if you have to run, all of you guys are like able to sprint on sand for 8 miles, and this guy is just some dude He's never going to keep up with you guys.
Yeah, we figure it out.
Yeah, you figure it out all right, I'm sure.
Yeah.
You've been in movies like Transformers, of course, directed by Michael Bay, directed The Rock, and now you're doing a lot of your own film stuff. That's actually how I found you, because you were doing some human trafficking, organ stuff.
Organ harvesting, yeah.
Tell me, tell me what we've done shows about organ harvesting on this show with David Kilgore, who was a Canadian human rights lawyer, episode 497, and he talked about that happening in China, like Chinese prisoners of conscience and things like that. I didn't realize this was something that was even more widespread. Tell us about what you're doing now besides kicking Dr. Drew's ass on a reality TV show about Navy SEAL training.
So I'm making films. I did the short film, The Unexpected, which is on YouTube now, and I'll get into how I kind of got into that side of it. And then that short got picked up. Since we've spoke, it got picked up to be a feature film. So we already got it fully financed. We got a major star we signed on to play one of the roles. We got another major star we're going to, so it's going to be a bigger film, which is good because now we're going to get the word out to a wider audience. But when I got out in 2016, I still felt that passion and need to serve in some way, and so I would connect with nonprofits, and I would have nonprofits reach out to me. And the one type of nonprofit that continued to reach out to me was human trafficking nonprofits. You know, I would have had various human trafficking nonprofits, and I didn't know what human trafficking was. I wasn't familiar with the term. And long story short, I would go do a job or help out with a nonprofit or help raise money. And then one day I got approached by another human trafficking nonprofit that actually employed former SEALs and former agency guys to go into other countries to rescue kids trapped in sex trafficking, but specifically kids who are being purchased by Americans. You know, so Americans would go down to some of these from these countries like Dominican Republic, Haiti, other places, and they would go pay for sex with these young, 12, 10, 11-year-old girls and boys. And so I remember this one particular nonprofit sent me a short documentary clip of what they did, and I watched it, and I was just like, my blood was boiling. My wife's a doctor, and she was working in community medicine at the time, so she had seen a lot of stuff. And she told me, after she watched the clip, she said, "Remi, you go do whatever you got to do, like go help those kids." And so went overseas, and that's when I got exposed to it more. And then that's when I was actually working in the film and TV industry at the time as well. I was working on Six Underground I was about to work on Six Underground at this point for Netflix, and when I got down there, my eyes were just like open fully. And I just remember being appalled. And I remember going into this, I was in this particular village in the DR where the parents would sell their daughters to traffickers in the north. And
Dominican Republic, for people who don't know what the DR is.
Yeah. And I just remember being disgusted. And our job in this particular mission was to educate the parents. So we were there to essentially tell a parent, hey, here's what's happening. Here's what these traffickers are doing to your daughters. And, kind of telling you need to stop doing this.
What did they think was happening, though? Like, if somebody wants to buy your kid, what do you think they're doing with your kid?
They knew it was for sex trafficking, but, it's one thing to they didn't visually see. It was just like out of sight. Okay, yeah, go take my daughter to the north.
Oh, man.
To go party or strip or whatever the case may be, and people are going to pay, but they didn't really know that it was going to be actual sex.
Oh my gosh.
And so we went down there, and I remember being in this village, and like I said, I was appalled, and our guide saw, because it was really tough for me. I mean, being a human guy, I learned how to calm down and talk to people to get information. But, being a father, I wasn't a father for the majority of my career as a SEAL. So now going down there and being a father, it was hard for me to stomach and talk to some of these people. And our guide pulled me aside, and he took me into this chapel that was no bigger than the size of 2 toilet stalls. And he was just like, and at the end of the chapel was a dead 6-month-old baby.
Oh my God.
And the baby had died because the mother's breast milk ran out. And so she got some formula and mixed the formula with the local water from the slum. And that's what ultimately killed the baby. So he wasn't showing me this to help make me justify what was happening, but he wanted to help give me some level of understanding because he saw that it was hard for me to communicate with these people without the full understanding, without some level of empathy, which I know that sounds weird. And so yeah, that helped me. And then, we continued doing the job and doing rescue stuff. And then when I got back from that trip, my phone had all these messages from Michael Bay's producing partner, Mike Case. And he was like, Remi, where have you been? Your phone's been going straight to voicemail. What's going on? And I said, dude, I've been down to DR. Dude. I was like out of it. I was like, dude, like it was horrific. And he's like, oh, okay. He's like, Michael Bay wants you to work on his next movie, Six Underground. He needs you to fly out to LA to start training the actors like now.
Yeah.
And I was like, all right, cool. But after I got off the phone, it was like these two worlds collided, right? This world of human trafficking that I had just been working in, and then this world of film and TV. And that's when a light went off in my head. And I was like, how about I combine these two worlds? Because I could go down to South America or other parts of the world and rescue 10, 20 kids, but it's such a global issue that there's going to be 20 million more kids.
Yeah, you're pissing into the wind, man.
Exactly. And I felt like, knowing how film and TV affected me as a kid and changed the trajectory of my life, and talking to other SEALs and other people who do specific jobs, changed the trajectory of their life. I figured that I could have a bigger impact on this fight against human trafficking, specifically organ harvesting, because so many people talk about human trafficking. When they hear the term human trafficking, they just think about sex trafficking. But human trafficking is a blanket term. Under human trafficking, you have sex trafficking, you have organ harvesting, you have forced marriage, you have forced labor, but you also have stuff like, blood trafficking. You also have stuff like, I interviewed this guy around the time when the film released, the short film released, and he had been trafficked from Venezuela to Colombia to Mexico with the promise from the cartel that they would move him into the U.S. And essentially what the cartel has been doing is they've been sending out e-pamphlets and messages, not just throughout South America, but to other parts of the world saying, hey, come to this particular part of Mexico. If you can get here, we'll get you in the U.S. And these people are coming to this particular part of Mexico and they're getting abducted. And they get trafficked. Man. And the girls are being used, the women are being used for sex trafficking, the men are being used for labor trafficking, and then the kids are being used as mules for drug trafficking. They're being used because they could fit through the tunnels that go from Mexico into the U.S. These really small tunnels that adults can't fit through, they could go through. And so, there's all these different forms of human trafficking, but I chose to focus on organ harvesting, and that's when I created the film. And the more I having worked in the human trafficking side of things and then like researching and doing all this stuff, the more I begin to learn how big and vast organ harvesting is. I mean, Egypt is considered the organ harvesting capital of the world. And
really,
you look at what's going on. Yeah.
Why?
You look at what's going on because there's a lot of migrants that come from Africa and other parts of the Middle East, and they try to use Egypt as a way to get into Europe and get to more civilized places, so to speak. And so a lot of kind of like what's happening in Mexico, a lot of these migrants and these poor people are getting stuck in Egypt, and they're getting told, hey, if you sell a kidney or if you do this, we'll get you into Italy, or we'll get you into France, or we'll move you into these other countries. And the poverty level is poverty is so out of control in Egypt, especially Cairo, Egypt, that you have this organized crime that's going on. As a matter of fact, there was if you can look it up, I'm sure you can find it, but you Google it, but there was a international organ harvesting ring that was based in Egypt that got busted, I want to say in 2015 or 2016. And the majority of the people that were part of that ring were doctors and nurses. And there was also a computer science engineer that was running a website and using the website to get people to find donors and to also find, people who were in need of kidneys. And so yeah, it's not just in Egypt. In India, it's massive. And there's a story that came out recently down in Costa Rica of a doctor who was brokering kidney deals. Essentially, he was when people in Israel needed a new kidney and they couldn't wait on a waiting list too long because they were going to die, he would find poor people in Costa Rica and kind of like bargain with them and then play on the fact that they were poor and essentially get them to sell their kidneys. So It's a very, very vast topic. And like I said, the reason why I wanted to make this the unexpected short film, and I didn't make the short film with the intent of, hey, this is going to be a big feature film. I made it, it says two could be continued at the end, but my goal was to do another short film, but I made the film in order to be able to expose more people to this atrocity of organ harvesting, and also warn Americans who are going to these other countries like Dominican Republic, like Haiti. They go into some nefarious places, cutting deals with people that they shouldn't be cutting deals with in order to get organs. And I kind of get it, because a lot of, it's like 4,000 Americans die each year waiting on the kidney waiting list.
I know people die on the waiting list, and I was going to say, like, it's a complex issue, because I kind of understand why people buy organs, but I also wonder, do they know where they came from? Because if I bought one to save my own life, I definitely wouldn't want to know that somebody was tricked, kidnapped, and then murdered for that organ, potentially murdered for that.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know. A lot of people don't, when they get into these deals, then a lot of people don't know where these organs come from. They just know that they're a match.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's a good match. And there was a story that came out actually a couple months ago. This girl who she fell in love on this dating app and went to, I can't remember what part of South America. And I think she was American. And this med school student, chopped her up, took her organs, and was going to sell them. And the people who were going to buy them didn't know where those organs came from.
That was a TikTok romance scam, wasn't it? Or he sold the organs on TikTok, and that's how he got caught? I vaguely remember this.
Yeah, it was something like that. Yeah, it was something like that on TikTok. Yeah.
God, man.
And that's where a lot of these these traffickers are using social media.
Yeah.
They're using social media. They're using Instagram. They're using hashtags. They're searching hashtags for people who are, that's why we have to be careful what we put on social media, because if somebody's sick, it's like, oh, my kidney problems is still bothering me, but here I am in a dialysis clinic. And then all of a sudden that person gets a message in their DMs. Hey, I think I know somebody, they get a message from someone who seems upstanding and normal. I think I know someone that can get you a kidney. They can get you bumped up on a donor list. Oh, you really do? Okay. Next message. Oh, they couldn't get you bumped up on the donor list, but if you pay X amount of dollars, that person said that they know a clinic down in TJ or a clinic down in wherever the case may be that does everything up front and right, and they have organs waiting for you. All right, I'm about to die. I'll do it. So it's very organized. And a lot of it is happening on social media. Social media is a driving factor. As a matter of fact, there was a report that came out, I want to say like 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago, as it relates to Facebook and Instagram, that's, not intentionally, but they're responsible for a lot of these trafficking operations that are happening with these nefarious figures.
Crazy. It's crazy. And I know that desperation it's in willful blindness, and it's a potent mixture, right? When you're desperate, you're dying, you don't care what it costs. And also someone's willing to lie to you about the source of the organ, because they're not going to say, we're going to kidnap some poor guy and just steal his organs. They're going to be like, no, there's all these organs going to waste from these people. They die in car crashes and they're just too far away. But for an extra 25 grand, we can make sure that they're medevac to a clean hospital and we'll get the organ. And you're like, cool. I don't want to ask any more questions, because even if I have a suspicion, this is my lifeline. So it's complicated because I get it, right? But it's so horrible. There was a story, I think you shared this to me, or maybe it was Dr. Drew, and maybe this is how we got in touch, but these girls went to the DR for cheap surgery, and she ended up getting her kidney stolen during the surgery. Do you know about this?
Yeah, I sent you that. I think
you did send me that, okay.
Yeah. She went down it was for like plastic surgery. I think it was for BBL or something like that.
She wanted a bigger butt, basically, and people were laughing about that, but I was like, hey, not funny. She got
no. It actually was a tummy tuck.
Oh, yes, you're right.
For a tummy tuck.
You're right.
And,
it was a tummy tuck.
It was a tummy tuck. And so, she goes out on anesthesia and, and wakes up. Tummy tuck surgery was done. She liked the results. Few days later, she gets back to, I think, Houston. I think she was from Houston. And she's just not feeling well. And, it's just, She's not holding down foods properly. She's feeling fatigued, feeling lightheaded, things, and she's suspecting it was from the surgery. But another month goes by, and she's like, this can't be the surgery because, my stomach feels fine. And then she goes to the doctor, and doctor says, long story short, there's more to the story. Hey, you have one kidney. Did you give a kidney up?
Oh my God.
Nope. You have one kidney, and the doctor in the DR took her one kidney.
That's
so
terrifying.
And sold it. And and you gotta. And I tell people all the time as it relates to this organ harvesting thing, people think that and I know I did, but the perception of these traffickers is that they're these scraggly, evil-looking, uneducated, on the corner type people. And the reality is the majority of people involved on the organ harvesting side of things are highly educated, learned people because they're doctors.
Yeah.
They're nurses. That was a doctor that performed her tummy tuck. He was educated. He knew what he was doing. And then he took her kidney, and then he sold her kidney.
Yeah.
So
oh my God.
Yeah, it's crazy, man.
That stuff is so disturbing. So, all right, I know it's been a minute, and you probably got to go to the beach with your kids, and I don't blame you. I got to do the same thing. So you're rescuing children. You're exposing human trafficking. We'll link to the short film in the show notes if we can do that. I'm not sure if it's
Yep.
You're exposing organ trafficking. Do you feel like the hero you set out to be in the Bronx?
No, I don't think I ever will. I don't think for me, I won't attain that status until my kids have grown up and become upstanding citizens. I think just a part of my life is to be a blessing to other people, is to fight the good fight. It's part of my DNA. I think it comes from my dad. The reason why he wanted to create Lagoon City was not so that he could be rich and wealthy. He wanted to create a place where people from all around the world could come and do business in Africa. He wanted to generate an economy for Africa, so everybody up and down the food chain in Nigeria can benefit from it. And that was his legacy. And I think that that's a part of who I am. Like, it's just part of my life to serve and to give and to fight. So I don't think there's anything heroic about that. But for me to reach that status of being a hero is to have invested in my kids and for them to be great people. Once they become adults and become great people, whatever it is that they do in life, and they're a great part of society, then I could claim that title. But until then, I can't. That's my personal standard.
Remi Adeleke, go spend time with your kids. Thank you for doing the show. This is really, really interesting, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate you. God bless you, man.
Thanks for checking out this entire episode of The Jordan Harbinger Show. If you're interested in exploring this topic further, check out the Jordan Harbinger Show podcast feed. There, we dive even deeper on this and many other topics. In the audio podcast, I also close open loops, cover things discussed off camera, off air, and give some parting lessons from our guest. You can find The Jordan Harbinger Show in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, any podcast app, or at jordanharbinger.com. And also, if you found this episode useful, please share it with those you care about. Last but not least, like, comment, and subscribe.